Morning. You know, our country's been through tons of revolutions that have really changed everything about it. You know, we went through the American Revolution, which changed us from a dependent colony to an independent nation. We went through the Industrial Revolution, which changed us from a primarily agrarian economy to a manufacturing economy. We went through the Information Revolution, which moved us from a primarily manufacturing economy to a services economy. We went through the counterculture revolution of the 60s, which emerged an entirely new subculture within the United States. We're in the middle of a religious cultural revolution in the United States right now. And now it's hard to describe something you're in the middle of accurately, because we're in the middle of it. But we've got to do our best to understand so that we can see it and know how to react. You know, faith is probably the most important topic in Christianity and in our lives. And yet, very few people know what biblical faith really is. The existentialists in the 19th century did a great job of considering this concept of belief. And I think that their work helps us understand the same faith that God counted as righteousness in Abraham. They showed that what people really believe is what they do, what they embody, what they practice, not what they say. You can say that you believe running red lights is dangerous, but if you run red lights regularly, I know you can't actually believe that. Their philosophy of examining belief was not to listen to what you say, but to look at what you do. Now, some have characterized these recent religious changes in the United States as a kind of irreligious America. Institutionalized religion is on the decline. People are now spiritual, but not religious. The group who self-identifies their religious affiliation as none on our census data is growing and is not showing any signs of slowing down. The objective, materialist worldview that science depends upon has come to dominate not just the scientific realm where it was designed to work and function, but every aspect of life. In this world where materialism has become the default assumption, you would think that a belief in spiritual things and the immaterial reality would diminish. We'd see less of it. But interestingly enough, that's not what we're seeing. More people than ever claim belief in the spirituality of some sort today in the United States than they ever have. In kind of a counterintuitive twist, the post-Christian United States is not a place without faith. It is instead a nation of spiritual people. Now, even those who reject spirituality altogether, those who self-identify as atheists, they also manifest a faith in things outside of material reality. Universal human rights, for instance. The inherent moral value of human beings. Where can you find these in nature? Can I look at inherent moral value of human beings under a microscope? Can I weigh or measure universal human rights? No. Even the faithless have a kind of faith. With this in mind, today's reading can teach us a lot about how to interact with people who do not profess faith. How Paul engages a people obsessed with truth and worship things, who worship things that they don't understand. This can help us as we seek to do the same in our culture. This morning we continue to follow the early days of the church and Paul's ministry. In Acts 17, Paul comes to Athens. Now, Athens is a unique place in the Roman Empire. Athens was the capital of Attica, the center of Grecian refinement and philosophy. It was named after Athena, the goddess of wisdom. And fittingly, they were obsessed with things like learning and novelty. The city was built upon 4 hills, and the setting of our story, the Areopagus, or Mars Hill, was kind of this open-air court where the people would debate issues of importance. Our reading picks up in Acts chapter 17, verse 16. Now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him, as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. And some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except the telling and hearing of something new. Now the way our story goes, Paul is out there talking about the things of God. Man, that's a takeaway, isn't it? He talks with his fellow Jews and faithful people in the synagogue, but then he goes out. He goes to what the text calls the marketplace, which probably refers to the Agora, which was the center valley between those 4 hills in Athens. And this is where everybody was. This is where people did business, hence the term marketplace. Notice he didn't just talk to the people he went to church with about God and His will. He talked to whoever happened to pass by. I don't know about you, but that's not what I do. I'm really comfortable talking about God and the gospel and what that means for my life and your life here, in this setting. But put me in a restaurant when the waitress comes up, or put me in the line at the DMV, or put me with a stranger. That's tough. But Paul didn't let that stop him. And I have to think that maybe he was more personable than I am, but at the same time, I know that wouldn't have made a difference to him. The gospel was something he was so passionate about that he wouldn't have let anything stop him from talking to people about it. And it's that passionate, consistent speaking about the gospel that gives him an opportunity to address them in a place and in a setting where they'll take time and take him seriously. It's because he was speaking in the marketplace that he was invited to the Areopagus. He was speaking in the everyday, so he was invited to the place where important people discuss important things. If it wasn't for that persistence and consistency, he would not have had that opportunity. The people decide to listen to him based on the glimpses of what he's talking about in the marketplace. If you want an opportunity to talk with your non-believing acquaintances, you need to consistently make God and the things of God part of your speech. It's only when people hear you in the marketplace that they'll invite you to be heard in a setting, in a context that matters and is transformative. Verse 22. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you." You know, I think if Paul walked around the United States today, I think he might actually say something similar. He would see people who profess to not believe in any higher reality than the material world treat other human beings as if they were intrinsically valuable. They act out the proposition that there is some moral standard that they should be held to. They act out the idea that when humans don't meet their potential, there is something real lost. They mold their lives around these realities and submit themselves to them in their choices and their behavior. They believe in all sorts of immaterial things, but they are usually unaware that they do, and they're usually unaware where they come from. So what we're called to do is to give them words to express what they already believe. They bow down to forces they are unaware of. So we, just as Paul engages them so they can articulate things that they already embody. And so let's look at how Paul goes about it. Verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind and breathes and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is not actually far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. And even as some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. You see, Paul doesn't start by pointing out what the Athenians are doing wrong. What he actually does is he embraces what they're doing right. Verse 29. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. You know, so often when we want to change somebody's mind, we are tempted to immediately jump in and start to correct the things that they have wrong. We see this in our relationships all the time. Faults, things that are wrong, always stand out to us more than the things that somebody's doing right. Well, we always notice the pimple on our face before we see the rest of it. The patch of grass that you miss while you're mowing sticks out like a sore thumb. The faults jump out to us. It's our instinct to go and fix the thing that's wrong. But what Paul does here instead is Paul engages what they have right. He doesn't immediately break out his Hebrew Bible and begin to quote the scriptures at them and show how their lives are wrong. It would have been completely foreign to them. They don't care about the Bible. That's not the world that they live in. He doesn't start quoting scriptures at them. He actually quotes their own poets and their own philosophers. Paul uses the truth that they have to bring them to the truth of the gospel. He doesn't condemn their knowledge or say that they have no idea how to live morally. He says, you're so close. In fact, you're already worshiping this unknown God. So why don't you become enlightened? And our culture, despite its faults, is built upon this Judeo-Christian metaphysic. They bow down before Christian assumptions and unconsciously embody them all the time. When those who do not profess faith in the God of Abraham stand up for the weak, who can't stand up for themselves, they worship God in ignorance. When they act as if every single life is valuable and worth cherishing, they worship in ignorance. When they act as if sacrifice for the greater good is noble, they worship in ignorance. The problem is, you can't affirm the good they embody if you don't take the time to learn it and understand it. All too often, Christians are quick to dismiss everything that isn't explicitly Christian. This is not only ineffective, but it goes directly against what Paul does in Athens. He quotes their poets to them. You know, he wasn't born with that knowledge. He didn't come out of the womb knowing Epicurean and Stoic philosophy. He had to study it. He had to open up Google and do some work. No. He had to find people who were learned, well-versed in Hellenistic culture and wisdom, and learn it and read and work. Not only that, he had to learn it in such a way that he could integrate it with what he already knows and make it useful to him. One of the earliest Christian apologists who wrote in the 2nd century, Justin Martyr, argued this, in not these exact words, but his argument was basically this. He said that all truth is God's truth. That if something is true and good, it came from God. He believed that the wisdom and truth that the secular world finds is put there by God to bring them towards Him. Just as Paul said, that God is bringing you towards Him. I think Paul buys into that. And maybe, just maybe, we should too. So what does it require for us to engage our culture like this? Well, this morning there are two things that I want to suggest to you. First, it requires humility. We need to understand that we don't have all the answers. And that the answers that other people have might just be some of the right ones. Not only that, but we have to have the humility to learn and engage other sources of wisdom. We can't quote the Bible to a biblically illiterate culture and expect them to be persuaded. Paul didn't try that, and neither should we. Secondly, it requires imagination. There is not an explicit link between Stoic philosophy and Christian doctrine, but Paul makes an imaginative leap and connects these images that allow his audience to get a grasp on the truth. We need to feel free to make imaginative leaps. What are places in the culture that you see the gospel reflected? Are there movies where you see the gospel of peace calling out to you? TV shows, books, current events. For me, the one that does it pretty good is Superman. I love Superman. He's this kind of symbol of hope, and how hope and strength are good. Hope is strength, and cowardice and despair and hate is weakness. You know, I can sell that to somebody who doesn't believe in God. And I can tell them that the things that they find appealing about hope and strength are found more profoundly in the gospel and in the resurrection. And I'll show you how. We did this a little bit last year when we looked at some of our sermon series that involved American sitcoms, where we engaged our culture in that way. It takes imagination. And I think God gives us permission to move out into that creative space so that we can engage with others. It isn't that we change the gospel, and in fact we shouldn't. If you change the gospel, you've changed something too important. The gospel hasn't changed. When Paul's preaching the gospel to the Athenians, the gospel hasn't changed, but his language and methods adapt to his audience. And our language and methods must adapt to our audience, or we will die. It takes time to engage culture. It takes work to engage culture. It takes creativity to engage culture, but we are called to engage. We're called to go into all the world, and as Paul says, become all things to all men, that by every possible means I might win some. Paul preached the gospel sermon without quoting scripture once to these Athenians, because that's what they needed. Let's work together to be what the people around us need us to be, to see the truth of the gospel. Maybe this morning you need to respond to that gospel for the first time. This is the time for that. Maybe you responded to that gospel a long time ago, but you've lost sight of what's important. You need to recommit. This is time for that. Maybe you want prayers to help you as you seek to engage the culture, because this is not an easy task. If you want to embark and engage the world around you for good, we want to pray over you and encourage you. If you have any need, would you come as we stand and as we sing?